My name is Mackenzie Walker. I'm 31 years old, and I recently sold my tech startup for $20 million. I thought that would be the beginning of everything I dreamed about: financial freedom, a home of my own, a future built on hard work. Instead, it turned into a nightmare that revealed the darkest truth I never wanted to face: that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who raised you. My story begins the night I placed $10 million in my mother's safe. I thought it would be the most secure place in the world. I was wrong. I grew up in a two-bedroom apartment in Portland with my single mom, Diane, and my younger sister, Rebecca. Money was tight. Mom worked double shifts at a diner, and I watched her come home every night with aching feet and the scent of fryer oil clinging to her hair. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Or so I thought. Birthdays meant boxed cake mix and hand-me-down gifts, and I learned early on that if I ever wanted more, I'd have to build it myself. I buried myself in school, in side jobs, in dreams that stretched far beyond our cramped apartment walls. When I got a full ride to MIT, it felt like the door to another world had opened. I worked 2 jobs just to survive, living off cheap noodles and ambition. I sent money home when I could, paid Mom's overdue bills, helped Rebecca through every crisis she created. After college, I launched a cybersecurity company, Secure Flow. For the first 2 years, I nearly drowned, but eventually I built something solid. By the 3rd year, banks and private clients were knocking down our door for encryption tech. The buyout came fast. 20 million wired to my account, and with it, a whole new life. But when it came time to close on my dream home, I made a decision that would shatter everything. I wanted the deal to move quickly, so I chose to make a $10 million cash offer. Not traditional, I know, but in a hot market, cash speaks louder than pre-approvals. The bank required days to prepare that kind of physical cash, and I didn't want to leave it in my apartment. So I chose the one place I thought was safest, my mother's house. I'd installed a top-of-the-line safe in her home office 3 years ago when she started collecting delicate figurines. It was built into the wall behind a bookcase, fireproof, backup key, hidden. I trusted it and her with my life's work. Jason, my fiancé, tried to talk me out of it. So did my banker. But I insisted. I hired 2 professional guards to deliver the cash and monitor the transfer into the safe. My mother was there when the duffel bags arrived. So was Rebecca. I remember the way they both watched the bags being zipped into that hidden compartment. At the time, I thought it was just awe. I mistook greed for wonder. That night, we had dinner together. Mom laughed louder than usual. Rebecca kept sneaking off to take hushed phone calls. The house felt off. But I ignored it. I brushed it aside as stress. That decision would come back to haunt me. The next morning, they were gone. The safe was open. The bags gone. All that remained was a note, written in my mother's neat handwriting. It said, "Thanks for the money. We're finally living the life we deserve. Don't try to find us." Mom and Rebecca. I sank to the floor. The betrayal hit harder than anything I'd ever experienced. Not a stranger, not a thief. My own family, my mother, my sister, the women I'd fought for, the ones I thought I'd pulled out of poverty with me. They took everything. But here's the part they never saw coming. I didn't break. I planned for this. And what they actually stole, let's just say it wasn't what they thought. I sat in that kitchen for hours just staring at the empty space where trust used to live. The duffel bags were gone. My mother's car was gone. Rebecca's room looked like it had never been lived in, drawers emptied, closet bare, toothbrush missing. There wasn't even a coffee cup in the sink. It was like they'd vaporized. But what hit harder than their disappearance was the precision of it all. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It had been planned, carefully, ruthlessly, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized the cracks had always been there. I just refused to see them. Looking back, I remember moments that felt off. Birthdays where my success was met with tight-lipped smiles, calls from Mom that started with congratulations and ended with financial requests. Rebecca's tears over rent, boyfriends, bad luck. I had been the family success story, MIT grad, tech founder, the one who made it. But that success came with invisible strings, expectations, jealousies no one admitted to. I wanted to believe I was lifting my family up with me, but maybe they felt like I was rising while they sank, and instead of asking for more, they chose to take everything. What hurt most wasn't the money. It was the silence before the strike. My mother had stood beside me while I transferred that cash. She asked questions with sugar-sweet interest, never once giving away what she was planning. My sister laughed over dinner, while imagining the closet space in my new house, all the while knowing she'd be on a plane by morning. That night, I'd slept in my childhood room, thinking I was safe, thinking I was home. But while I dreamed of building a future, they were counting down the hours to destroy it. Jason arrived within the hour after I called. He held me like someone afraid I might shatter. I showed him the note. We sat in silence until the police arrived. When Detective Sarah Martinez asked if I had any idea where they might have gone, I couldn't answer. I had no clue who they even were anymore. And then something else began to take root inside me. Not rage, not grief, but clarity. This wasn't just about a betrayal. It was about being blind, about loving too much, trusting too fully, and finally learning what that costs. In the days that followed, I watched everything unravel. The real estate deal collapsed, of course. I couldn't offer cash I didn't have. Word spread through my professional network faster than I could contain it. Personal complications, they whispered. Family scandal, a cancelled keynote speech here. A rescinded advisory board offer there. People who once saw me as a rising star now saw a cautionary tale. It was brutal. But through it all, I never stopped asking myself, what if they'd just asked? What if they'd needed something and told me? But that was the mistake I had to stop making, assuming they cared about my boundaries, assuming love would stop them. That was over now. What remained was cold calculation, a sense of emotional survival, and slowly from the ashes of my humiliation, a plan began to form. One that wouldn't rely on lawyers or confrontation. No yelling, no crying, just strategy, precision, and a trap they had already walked into, smiling. 3 days after the theft, I got a call that changed everything. It was Trevor, one of the private security guards I'd hired to escort me and the cash to my mother's house. He spoke in a quiet, firm voice. "Miss Walker, I need to see you in person. Now, it's about the delivery. What I have to tell you can't be said over the phone." I was numb, still reeling from the betrayal, but something about his tone jolted me. I gave him my address and waited. When he arrived, his expression was unreadable, somewhere between serious and stunned. Trevor sat across from me in my kitchen and pulled out a piece of folded paper. 3 days before we delivered the money, he said slowly, "You signed this form." It instructed us to swap the real cash with high-grade counterfeit bills and place the authentic money in our maximum security vault. I stared at him, utterly confused. But then a memory sparked, me at the bank, stressed and overwhelmed. Signing forms the head of security handed me. I hadn't read them carefully. I trusted them, and apparently I'd signed off on something I barely remembered. I took the document from Trevor and examined it. My signature, my handwriting, all real. What I'd signed, unknowingly, was a request to preemptively protect the money in case of a worst-case scenario. It had been part of a protocol I vaguely agreed to in conversation with Kyle, the owner of the security firm, a friend I trusted from college. Turns out, he'd followed my offhanded fears and implemented a fail-safe. Without my realizing it, I had ordered the perfect trap. While I slept in my childhood bed that night, my mother and sister were walking off with duffel bags filled with nothing but paper. I didn't laugh, not right away. The emotional weight was too heavy, but something shifted in me. For the first time in weeks, I felt power return to my spine. They thought they'd won. They thought they'd flown off into a glamorous new life. But all they'd taken were fakes. The real $10 million was locked in a vault beneath a fortified facility, untouched, unspent, untouchable. My hands trembled, not with fear anymore, but with focus. I had been dragged into a war I didn't ask for, but now I knew I was holding the stronger hand. Trevor handed me a tablet and showed me something else. Embedded in the counterfeit bills were discrete tracking devices, each one small enough to be missed, but powerful enough to trace movements across the globe. "This is their trail," he said, tapping the screen. Red pins lit up across Dubai, Monaco, and Singapore. They were flaunting their stolen life, unaware they were being watched. The irony made my stomach turn, but also filled me with something close to satisfaction. I didn't need to chase them anymore. I only had to follow the trail they were so proudly blazing. I thanked Trevor and made one final request. Let them keep going. Let them feel invincible, because I had no intention of yelling, no intention of making threats. I was done with emotional outbursts. I was going to end this with silence, intelligence, and the kind of poetic justice they never saw coming. What they'd stolen wasn't real, but what I was about to take back, that would be unforgettable. The next few days became a controlled operation. I wasn't acting alone anymore. I had a small, tightly trusted team. Kyle from the security firm, Detective Martinez, and Haley, my former COO and best friend who'd always had a knack for strategy under pressure. We turned my apartment into a war room. Screens on the walls tracked every ping from the counterfeit bills. They were active, very active. The signals lit up across cities that most people only saw in luxury magazines. Dubai, Monte Carlo, Tokyo, then Milan. My mother and sister weren't hiding. They were celebrating. Haley sat beside me as we scrolled through Instagram profiles, burner accounts we'd tied to them. There were cropped photos of lavish brunches, blurry champagne flutes, and designer labels. You couldn't see their faces, but I recognized the gestures. Rebecca's tilted wrist, my mother's rings. They were showcasing their new lifestyle, convinced they were untouchable. I watched each post with a strange calmness. The more they flaunted, the more predictable they became. The more predictable, the easier they were to catch. The only real question was, where would they go next? Kyle cross-referenced their movements with luxury hotels and private jet records. He was able to confirm that they had booked a 5-night stay at the Palazzo Piri in Milan under their fake names, Catherine and Emily Bradford. They were expected to arrive in 3 days. I circled the date on my calendar. That was when I'd confront them, but not with police sirens or lawyers banging on their door. I wanted to look them in the eye. I wanted to see their faces at the exact moment they realized what they had done and what they had lost. Detective Martinez worked with Italian financial authorities to prepare a coordinated response. We weren't just going after them for theft. We were going after them for possession and circulation of counterfeit currency, which held serious weight in international law. When the time came, the officers would step in discreetly and with force. But first, I'd get to speak. One moment, one table, one conversation. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity. And more than anything, I wanted them to hear it from me. The truth, raw and undiluted. I boarded a flight to Milan with Haley at my side. We barely spoke during the trip. There was a heaviness in the air, like the quiet before a storm. When we landed, the city welcomed us with golden sunlight and cobblestone streets, indifferent to the drama unfolding beneath its elegant charm. We checked into a nearby hotel, not far from the palazzo, and reviewed our plan one last time. The authorities would wait outside. My job was simple: walk into that restaurant, sit at their table, and let the truth do its work. That evening, I stood outside the restaurant where they had made reservations. My heart wasn't racing, it was steady, almost eerie so. I felt something settle inside me. This wasn't a confrontation, this was a mirror, one they'd have to look into. I walked through the doors wearing a black dress and calm resolve. I spotted them instantly, seated in a private corner, sipping from crystal glasses, laughing like women who believed the world had finally given them what they were owed. And that's when I walked toward them. Not as their daughter, not as their sister, but as the reckoning they never expected. I stopped beside their table, silent for a beat. My presence rippled through the air like a pin dropped in still water. My mother's face drained of color. Rebecca's eyes widened in disbelief. Their forks hovered mid-air. Time slowed. "Room for one more?" I asked quietly, pulling out the empty chair. The silence was deafening. A moment ago they were queens, now they were ghosts confronted by the past they thought they'd buried. I sat across from them, steady and composed, not a tremor in my voice. "It's good to see you both," I said, locking eyes with the woman who gave birth to me. Rebecca recovered first, her voice sharp with nerves disguised as defiance. "What are you doing here?" Her fingers fumbled near her bag. I already knew what was inside. "Relax," I said, nodding at the waiter nearby. "Just dinner, champagne's on me." My mother finally found her voice. "Mackenzie, we didn't think." I cut her off with a look. "You thought I'd fall apart. You thought you were safe. Let me guess, Monaco was beautiful. Did you enjoy Tokyo, the private jet, the jewelry?" I pulled out a folded sheet of paper from my clutch and laid it on the table. "Here's your itinerary," I added with a calm smile. "I've been watching you the entire time." My mother's hand trembled as she reached for the document. Rebecca stared at me like I'd grown another head. You tracked us," she said, her voice cracking. "No," I replied. "The money did." I leaned in. "What you took, those beautifully stacked bills, they're fake, every single one. High-grade counterfeits, very convincing. Until you try to deposit them or travel with them, or use them in any way that involves real scrutiny." My mother looked down at her wine glass. Rebecca went pale. "That's not possible," she whispered. "We've been using them," I shrugged. "In tourist shops, with distracted staff. But try converting it into anything real, and you'll see." My voice never rose. It didn't have to. I let the weight of each word settle like stone. "The real money," I said, "never left the vault. I had a security firm swap it out days before delivery. I signed the order myself, though I barely remember doing it at the time. I guess some part of me didn't fully trust you." I gave them a sad smile. Turns out, that part of me was the only one that got it right. Rebecca sat back hard in her chair, the breath knocked out of her. My mother's hand gripped the tablecloth as though it could steady her sinking world. For a moment we all just sat there. No shouting, no begging, just the echo of choices finally coming home. Then I stood, adjusted my coat, and nodded toward the entrance. Two plain-clothed Italian financial officers walked in. Detective Martinez followed behind, her badge already out. I didn't need to say anything. My mother's eyes widened as the officers approached. "I didn't press charges in America," I said as they reached the table, "but in Italy, Possession of counterfeit currency is a serious offense. The officers moved swiftly. Rebecca whispered something to my mother, who stared at me with eyes full of something that wasn't remorse. It was disbelief that I had outsmarted her. They were escorted out calmly, without spectacle. The diners around us barely noticed. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. I had spoken my truth, laid it bare, and walked away without needing to see the collapse. Justice had no need for dramatics. I stepped outside into the cool Milanese air, my heart light. This was not revenge. This was revelation. And as the police car disappeared into the night, I didn't feel like a daughter disowned. I felt like a woman reborn. I didn't return to the States immediately. I stayed in Milan for a few days after the arrest, walking its ancient streets, sipping coffee at quiet cafes, watching the world move on as if nothing had happened. And in a way it hadn't. For most people, life was still ordinary, but inside me, something had finally shifted. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe without tension, curled around my ribs. The haunting questions, the betrayal, the rage, the grief, they were still there, but now they had structure, they had context, and they had an ending. Back in the US, the legal process was unfolding, but I wasn't deeply involved. Italian authorities had the counterfeit charges well in hand. My mother and sister were being held for fraud and financial crimes. They would face consequences, not from me, but from the systems they thought they could outwit. I made the choice not to deliver a victim impact statement. There was no speech I needed to give, no pain I needed to perform. The silence of my absence in that courtroom would speak louder than any words I could offer. Jason met me at the airport when I returned home. I hadn't told him everything while I was away. I wanted to show him, not with facts, but with the calm on my face, the steadiness in my step. "You look different," he said as he embraced me. Not just relieved, lighter. And I was lighter, because I'd faced something unspeakable and didn't let it turn me bitter. Lighter, because I finally understood the limits of what love could fix and the infinite strength of what self-respect could rebuild. We didn't jump back into life the way it was. We rebuilt slowly, carefully. We went to therapy together, unpacked the months of fear and distance that had wedged themselves between us. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I learned to stop apologizing for my pain, and he learned to sit in it with me. Our relationship became quieter, more grounded. And one day, over breakfast, Jason reached for my hand and said, "You came back stronger, not harder." That's rare. I believed him. I felt it in my bones. I bought a house 6 weeks later. Not the extravagant mansion I once chased, but a warm, quiet home on a wooded hill. It had a wraparound porch, a garden that needed love, and sunlight that filled the rooms in the morning. I called it Juniper Hollow, a name I invented that made me feel like I'd claimed a new chapter, not one born from money or pain, but from peace. I furnished it slowly, intentionally. I didn't install a vault. I didn't need one anymore. I started a consulting firm, just me and a small team, working with startups, helping young founders navigate the world I once stumbled through alone. My name meant something different now, not just in the tech world, but in my own mind. Mackenzie Walker wasn't just the woman who survived a theft. She was the woman who planned her own rescue, who forgave without forgetting, and who learned that love without boundaries is just another word for permission. My past wasn't a weakness, it was a map, and I had followed it through betrayal, through silence, all the way back to myself. There's a strange stillness that comes after you've walked through fire and survived. It doesn't feel like victory. It feels like clarity, quiet, clean. I sat on the porch of Juniper Hollow one morning, wrapped in a blanket, watching the trees sway in the breeze. It was the first time I realized I hadn't cried in weeks. Not because the pain had disappeared, but because it had finally settled into its rightful place, behind me, not inside me. I didn't need justice anymore. I didn't need an apology. What I needed was already mine: peace. Sometimes people ask me if I forgave them. My mother and sister. I never have a simple answer. Forgiveness isn't a gate you walk through, it's a path you build as you go. Some days I take steps toward it, other days I sit down and rest. But I've stopped trying to understand why they did it. That used to consume me. The why, the how, the what did I do wrong. But betrayal says more about the betrayer than it ever does about the betrayed. I know that now, and strangely, knowing it has freed me. I still get updates from Detective Martinez from time to time. The legal proceedings overseas are ongoing. My mother is still awaiting sentencing. Rebecca, ever the opportunist, has already tried to cut a deal. I don't engage. I don't watch the trials. I don't read the documents. That chapter is written. And if they ever reach out again, it won't be to ask for forgiveness. It'll be because they've run out of people to manipulate. But I'm not the same woman they left behind. I don't need closure from people who were never open to me in the first place. The most unexpected part of healing was rediscovering joy in small, mundane things. Planting lavender in the backyard. Learning to cook again without takeout containers or stress-fueled pacing. Even my work changed. I no longer craved the chase. I wanted to build, not to prove anything, but to contribute, to guide. My new company didn't make headlines, but it made meaning, and that was enough. Maybe that's what power really is. Not control, but choice. Quiet, grounded choice. Jason and I started hiking together again. It had been years since we made space for it. One afternoon, as we rested on a cliff edge overlooking the valley, he turned to me and said, "I think this is the happiest I've ever seen you." I smiled, not because I was happy in the traditional sense, but because I was whole. That wholeness came at a price. But I paid it, and I would never pay it again. They say people are either warnings or blessings. My mother and sister were both. They warned me of the cost of unchecked loyalty. But in the aftermath of their betrayal, I found something I never expected to reclaim myself. The self that existed before success, before expectations, before the desire to prove my worth by carrying others. I no longer carry what isn't mine. That lesson was brutal, but it was also sacred. In the quiet aftermath, I took inventory not of what had been stolen, but of what had survived. That list was longer than I expected. My integrity, my sense of purpose, the quiet strength I never knew I possessed until I had to rely on it completely. What they took was money. Yes, but money was never the core of my identity. What I found in its absence was worth far more. The ability to rebuild without resentment, to protect without punishing, and to love without losing myself. I've had time now to reflect on the deeper truth, the one most people avoid. Sometimes the worst thing that ever happens to you is the thing that sets you free. Before the theft, I was generous to a fault, always trying to compensate for my family's lack. I didn't give from abundance, I gave from guilt. I thought success could fix pain, that money could soothe resentment. But some wounds don't want to be healed. Some people cling to their bitterness like armor. And no amount of giving will ever be enough for those who refuse to grow. I stopped asking questions that only hurt me. Did my mother ever really love me? Was Rebecca always envious? Were the smiles real or rehearsed? I'll never know. And I've made peace with that. What matters is who I choose to be, not who they chose to become. I've set down the weight of their betrayal and picked up the tools of creation, of life beyond the ashes. I plant, I build, I teach, I trust again, not blindly, not naively, but wisely, carefully, with eyes open and heart still soft. People who hear my story always ask the same thing. Would you do it differently? The answer surprises even me. No, I wouldn't. Because if I hadn't trusted them, I wouldn't have discovered how strong I was. If I hadn't been betrayed, I wouldn't have learned how to protect myself. If I hadn't lost what I thought was everything, I wouldn't have realized I already had what mattered most. Peace, purpose, self-respect. The kind of resilience that can't be bought, only earned. I sometimes imagine them somewhere far away, living on borrowed time, still thinking they fooled me, still believing they won. But I don't think of them with anger anymore. I think of them like characters in a book I've already closed. Their story doesn't get to follow me into this new chapter. They taught me a lesson, even if it cost me nearly everything. And I've honored that cost by becoming someone they can no longer reach. So to anyone listening, anyone who's felt that familiar sting of betrayal, especially from someone you once trusted completely, hear this. You don't need their apology to heal. You don't need revenge to rise. You only need one thing: to choose yourself. Again and again, quietly, powerfully, and with full faith that your worth was never defined by what they took, but by what you refuse to lose. People think falling apart is the end, that when your trust is shattered and your reality upended, you're somehow broken beyond repair. But I've learned something truer. Being undone is not the end, it's the beginning. It's the unraveling of false narratives, the shedding of masks, the death of illusions we never asked to believe. What my mother and sister took from me forced me to confront the quiet lies I'd been living. That I could protect people from their own resentment, that loyalty would be returned in kind, that love was proof against greed. In that destruction, I found the deepest power I've ever known, the power to rewrite, not just my future, but my identity. Before the betrayal, I defined myself through what I gave, through how needed I was. I thought that was strength. But true strength is knowing when to give and when to say no, when to protect and when to let people feel the weight of their own decisions. That wasn't cruelty, it was clarity. A painful, necessary clarity that changed every relationship I had moving forward. I became more discerning. I stopped confusing kindness with access. Not everyone deserves your story. Not everyone can handle your success. And not everyone, no matter how close they sit at your table, will celebrate your growth. I learned to stop inviting everyone to dine just because they shared my blood. Family, it turns out, is more than DNA. It's alignment, it's respect, and it's earned. I used to believe love meant forever. Now I believe love means freedom. The freedom to walk away when someone turns it into a weapon. Jason and I began a new rhythm. He saw me rebuild with his own eyes. Not with grand gestures, but with small, deliberate steps. We cooked together, we planted trees, we laughed again. I think he loved me more, not despite what I'd endured, but because of how I chose to carry it, quietly, strongly, without bitterness. One night he looked at me and said, "You turned fire into architecture." And I realized that was the only legacy I wanted to leave behind, not a list of achievements, but a blueprint for rising with grace. When I spoke at a tech summit months later, I didn't mention the theft, but I spoke about resilience, about safeguarding what matters, about leading with vision instead of ego. A young founder came up to me afterward, tears in her eyes. "I've been betrayed by people I trusted too," she whispered. "But watching you made me believe I could still build something that mattered." That's when I knew the story was no longer mine alone. It was a lifeline for someone else. To be undone and still choose to stand. That's the power no one can steal. not even the ones who tried. And if you've ever stood in the ashes of something you thought would last forever, let this truth settle in your bones. You are not ruined. You are refined. What they broke wasn't your future. It was the illusion that they were part of it. And in losing them, you found the most honest version of yourself. They wrote me one last time, months after the sentencing, when the dust had long settled and my name had faded from the headlines. The letter came in plain packaging, postmarked from the correctional facility where my mother now resided. The handwriting was unmistakable, neat, controlled. Hers. It began with, "I'm sorry," and ended with, "Maybe one day you'll understand why we did it." I read it once, then twice, and then I placed it back in the envelope and tucked it away, not because I wanted to hold on to it, but because I needed a final symbol of what I was releasing. I never wrote back. Not out of spite. Not because I wanted her to wonder, but because I had nothing left to say. Everything that needed to be spoken had already been written in the silence of my absence, in the peace I had chosen, in the way I was living. There are some betrayals too deep for words, and there are some truths too sacred to argue. She would carry her story, I would carry mine, and mine would not be one of bitterness. It would be a story of boundaries, of rising, of building something indestructible from what others thought they had shattered. Rebecca didn't write. Maybe she thought I wouldn't read it. Maybe she believed her sentence was unfair. But I know this. Even when they stepped onto that plane thinking they had stolen a fortune, they were already bankrupt in something far more valuable: integrity, trust, and love. What they lost in that theft wasn't just a relationship with me. They lost the last version of themselves that could have come home. They'll never get that version back. That was the true cost. As for me, I kept going. My company grew at its own pace, steadier now, not fueled by desperation or pressure to prove anything. I chose my clients. I mentored quietly. I lived in the house with the porch swing, watched the seasons shift around me, and began to write, not about tech or finance, but about trust, resilience, and reinvention. I started speaking to audiences who didn't want just business advice, but life wisdom, because I had earned every line of it the hard way. I stopped thinking of myself as the woman who had 10 million stolen. Instead, I saw myself as the woman who had something far rarer: the courage to not become like the people who hurt her. That was the victory. Not revenge, not even justice, but restraint, grace. A clean conscience, the unshakable knowledge that I responded with intelligence, not retaliation, that I stayed rooted in who I was while the people who tried to use me lost themselves. So here it is, the last thing I'll ever say to them, though they'll never hear it. You didn't break me. You revealed me. And I thank you for that.